Every night followed the same pattern. The lights would dim, the noise of the day would fade, and I would move a little closer, careful, hopeful, already knowing the answer. She never raised her voice. She never explained. It was always a calm, effortless no, as if rejecting me cost her nothing at all. Night after night I told myself love meant patience, that showing up mattered more than being wanted. I stayed, even when it felt like knocking on a door that was never going to open, until one night I didn't knock. I didn't ask. I didn't show up at all. That's when everything changed in a way I never expected. This isn't a story about intimacy alone. It's about what happens when one person keeps giving and the other gets used to receiving without consequence. It's about the quiet damage of rejection. The kind that docent tea leaf bruises but slowly convinces you that asking for love is something you should be ashamed of. For a long time, I believed walking away would bring relief, maybe even freedom. I didn't realize it would expose truths neither of us were ready to face. Because sometimes the moment you stop showing up is the moment the other person finally sees what they've been losing in. Sometimes by then, it's already too late. It didn't start with anger or distance. It started quietly, almost politely, the way things do when you don't want to admit there's a problem. At first I told myself it was stress. Long days, tired nights, responsibilities stacking up between us like furniture. We never moved out of the way. When I reached for her hand in bed and she gently pulled away, I smiled and said nothing. When I leaned in and she turned her face, I laughed it off. Love, I believed, was about understanding, so I understood, or at least I pretended to. But nights have a way of repeating themselves. Repetition turns moments into patterns. The not tonight became expected. The soft excuses became rehearsed. Headache. Long day. Maybe tomorrow. Always tomorrow. I stopped initiating with hope and started doing it out of habit. Like a ritual I felt obligated to complete, even though I already knew the ending. The rejection wasn't loud or cruel. That's what made it worse. It was calm, controlled, almost indifferent. As if my wanting her was an inconvenience she'd learned to manage. I began to notice how everything else stayed normal. We laughed during dinner. We talked about work, about bills, about shows we were watching. From the outside, we looked fine. Better than fine. But the nights told a different story. In the dark, with nothing to distract me, I felt the gap between us widen. Would lie awake listening to her breathe, wondering how two people could share the same bed and feel so far apart. I started counting time, not minutes or hours, but rejections. One more no, another night gone. What hurt most wasn't the physical absence. It was what the rejection began to say about me. I questioned myself constantly. Was I unattractive now? Had I changed? Is there something wrong with the way I wanted her? I replayed old memories in my head, trying to locate the moment I became someone she no longer desired. I never asked her directly. I was afraid of the answer. Or worse afraid, she wouldn't even see it as a problem. Slowly, I adjusted. I stopped touching her at night. I rolled over sooner. I kept my distance, pretending sleep came easily. But inside something was eroding. I felt small for wanting closeness, embarrassed for missing something that should have been natural. I told myself this was just how marriages evolve, that passion fades and mature love replaces it. Yet deep down, I knew this wasn't about fading passion. It was about being unseen. The pattern extended beyond the bedroom. I noticed how my presence had become predictable, safe, guaranteed. I was always there, always patient, always understanding. I showed up every night, even when it hurt, because I thought consistency proved love. I didn't realize consistency, without boundaries, teaches the other person that your needs matter. She never had to confront what she was withholding, because I never stopped offering. There were moments, small ones, when I almost spoke up, when I almost said, "This hurts," or "I feel rejected," or "I miss you," but the words stayed trapped in my chest. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want to be the man begging to be wanted. So I stayed silent. And silence became part of the pattern too. By the time I fully recognized it, the rejection no longer shocked me. It was routine, expected, almost comforting in its predictability. And that's when I realized how dangerous it had become. Not because she kept saying no, but because I kept showing up, teaching both of us that my absence would never be an option. There wasn't a single moment when I broke. No slammed doors, no shouted accusations. It happened quietly, the way cracks form in a wall you pass every day without noticing, until one morning you realize the damage has been there for a long time. The breaking point didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with exhaustion. I remember one night in particular, nothing special about it. Same routine, same silence. We brushed our teeth side by side without looking at each other, the mirror reflecting to people moving in sync but living separately. When we got into bed, she turned her back to me almost immediately, not out of anger, out of habit. And something inside me finally understood what my mind had been avoiding. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase. This was our new normal. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar numbness. Not sadness, not anger, just a hollow quiet where hope used to live. For the first time, I didn't reach out. I didn't test the waters. I didn't ask without words. I simply stayed still, and she didn't notice. That was the moment that hurt the most, not that she rejected me, but that my absence went completely unfelt. Days passed, then weeks. I carried the weight with me everywhere. At work, I found myself distracted, replaying conversations that never happened. With friends, I laughed at the right moments, nodded at the right times, while feeling like I was watching my life from behind glass. I wanted to talk to someone, but how do you explain loneliness when you're married? How do you admit you feel unwanted by the person who promised to choose you every day? At night, the silence grew heavier. I started going to bed later, lingering on the couch, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, waiting until I was sure she'd already fallen asleep. It was easier that way. No risk, no disappointment, just distance disguised as peace. She never asked why I stayed up. I never offered an explanation. We were both avoiding something, and somehow that avoidance became our shared language. The breaking point crept in through small humiliations. The way she flinched when I touched her waist in passing, the polite smile when I complimented her, like praise from a coworker instead of a husband. The way intimacy became something I was expected to want less of, as if my desire was childish, inconvenient, something I should have outgrown by now. I started to feel ashamed of wanting closeness at all. One evening, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. My shoulders were slumped, my eyes tired. There was a hesitation in my posture, like I was constantly bracing for rejection, even when I was alone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just affecting our marriage. It was changing how I saw myself. I was shrinking to fit into a life where my needs took up too much space. I considered talking to her. I rehearsed the conversation in my head dozens of times. I imagined myself staying calm, explaining how I felt without blame. But every version ended the same way, with her dismissing it, minimizing it, or worse, agreeing half-heartedly and changing nothing. I wasn't afraid of a fight anymore. I was afraid of indifference, afraid that my pain wouldn't even register as real. The silent breaking point wasn't loud, but it was final. It was the moment I realized that continuing like this would cost me more than leaving ever could. I wasn't angry at her. I was tired of disappearing, tired of showing up every night hoping for something that never came. Tired of teaching myself to accept less and call it love. One night as I lay beside her, listening to the familiar rhythm of her breathing, I made a decision. I didn't speak out loud. I didn't promise to fix things. I didn't threaten to leave. Simply decided I would stop offering myself where I wasn't wanted. Not out of punishment. Out of survival. She slept peacefully. I stared into the darkness, feeling something shift inside me, not relief, not confidence, but clarity. I finally understood that staying silent wasn't protecting the relationship. It was slowly destroying me. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered what would happen if I stopped showing up at all. At first, my absence was subtle. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. I still came home. Still asked how her day was. Still sat beside her on the couch. Something essential was missing my effort. The invisible reaching. The quiet hoping. I stopped initiating conversations that led nowhere. Stopped trying to bridge silences she seemed comfortable living inside. I was there, but I wasn't offering myself anymore, and that difference was louder than any argument we'd never had. She didn't notice right away. Or maybe she did, and chose not to. Mornings passed with polite routines, evenings dissolved into separate corners of the house. I no longer waited for her to come to bed. I no longer lingered for a goodnight kiss that felt more like an obligation than affection. Instead, I filled my time with small escapes, late walks, longer showers, quiet moments where I could breathe without feeling rejected. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking for permission to exist. Something strange happened inside me during that time. The ache didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being sharp and humiliating and became dull, distant. I wasn't constantly bracing for disappointment anymore. And with that came a dangerous calm. It's the kind that doesn't repair things, but prepares you to let go of them. Weeks passed before she finally sensed the shift. It wasn't my silence that caught her attention, it was my peace. I stopped reacting. When she canceled plans, I shrugged. She turned away from me in bed. I rolled over without comment. Days went by without meaningful conversation. I didn't try to fill the gap. That was when she started watching me differently, like someone noticing a sound that had been missing for a while. One evening, she asked if something was wrong. The question was casual, almost careless, but it landed heavier than she knew. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how tired I was of translating my pain into words she never truly heard. I told her I was fine. I meant it not because things were good, but because I had stopped fighting the truth. My absence began to echo in the spaces I used to occupy. The empty side of the bed when I stayed up late. Out the quiet dinners where I no longer tried to spark conversation. The weekends where I made plans without checking first. She started filling the silence with questions, with irritation, with confusion. It was unsettling for her to realize that the man who once waited, once asked, once tried, was no longer knocking on a closed door. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't what she expected. She had grown used to my presence as something guaranteed, something she could deny without consequence. My absence disrupted that balance. It forced her to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable when you've mistaken someone's patience for permanence. There were moments when guilt tried to pull me back, and I wondered if I was being cruel by withdrawing instead of confronting. But then I remembered all the nights I lay awake beside her, silently begging for closeness she never offered. I remembered how small I had felt, how invisible. This wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. One night, she reached for me unexpectedly, her hand resting on my arm as if testing whether I was still there. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. The hesitation between us said everything. She was reaching out because she felt the distance, not because she suddenly understood it. And I realized something that terrified me. Even if she changed now, I wasn't sure I could feel the same way again. Absence has a way of revealing truth. It shows you who notices when you're going, and who only notices when they start losing control. As I stepped further back, I saw our relationship more clearly than ever before, not as it used to be, not as I wished it could be, but as it truly was. And in that clarity, I understood the hardest truth of all. Sometimes people, Auntie, miss you until you stop showing up, and by then, it might already be too late. By the time she finally realized what was happening, the balance between us had already shifted. Not loudly, not with slammed doors or raised voices. It shifted quietly, the way power always does when one person stops, needing what the other withholds. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't even hopeful. That terrified her more than any argument ever could. She started trying in small, uncertain ways. A longer glance, a softer tone. Questions about my day that felt rehearsed, like lines she wasn't sure how to deliver. She touched my arm more often, sat closer on the couch, lingered in the doorway when I was about to leave. But the timing was wrong. These gestures came after the silence had already done its work. After I'd already learned how to live without expecting anything from her. For the first time, she was the one waiting, watching, wondering. I could feel it in the pauses she left open, hoping I'd step into them. I didn't. Not because I wanted revenge, but because something inside me had changed. The man who used to rush toward any sign of affection was gone. In his place stood someone who understood his own worth, and the cost of giving it away too easily. She asked me one night if I was pulling away on purpose. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was afraid. I told her the truth, calmly and without drama. I hadn't pulled away. I had simply stopped pushing forward. The difference stunned her. It reframed everything she thought she knew about us. It's about me. That was when the consequences truly surfaced. Not for me, but for her. She began to see the relationship from the other side of absence. To feel what it was like to reach out and not be met halfway. To want reassurance and receive silence instead. The very space she once guarded so carefully had become a distance she didn't know how to cross. She tried to regain control by asking where we stood, what I wanted, whether we could fix things. But power doesn't return just because someone asks for it back. It returns only when trust and effort arrive together. And even then, not always. I told her I didn't know what I wanted anymore. And that uncertainty was the most honest thing I'd said in years. There was no explosion. No dramatic breakup scene. Just the slow realization settling between us like fog. The relationship had changed its shape, and it might never fit us the same way again. She had lost the comfort of my constant presence. I had gained the clarity that comes from stepping back. In that final stretch, I understood something crucial. Love that is denied long enough doesn't always turn into anger. Sometimes it turns into independence. And independence changes the rules. It removes desperation. It shifts power. It forces consequences not as punishment, but as truth. By the time she was ready to say yes, I had already learned how to live with no. And that knowledge, once earned, cannot be taken back. In the end, this story isn't really about rejection, or silence, or even about who stayed and who walked away. It's about what happens inside a person when they are ignored for too long. About how love doesn't always die in a dramatic moment, sometimes it fades quietly. Teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn but desperately needed. I didn't leave to punish her. I didn't stop showing up to make her chase me. I stopped because somewhere along the way, I realized I had been abandoning myself. And maybe that is the hardest truth to face. Sometimes the pain we carry isn't caused by one final betrayal, but by 1,000 small dismissals we chose to endure. This story is for anyone who kept showing up when their heart wasn't being met, for anyone who waited for warmth that never came, and for anyone who finally learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If this story connected with you, if you saw a piece of your own life reflected in it, you're not alone.
Ow.
Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel seen. And if you want more real, emotional stories like this, stories that don't shy away from the quiet truths, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the stories we hear are the ones that finally help us understand our own.